May I speak to you in the name of God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
This past week, on Tuesday evening, I was coming here to start up premarital counseling with a couple who will be getting married, not here, but elsewhere by me, this coming November. And I ran into my sister before I came here and told her what I was going to go do, and she kind of made some offhand remark about how strange it is that I do premarital counseling. She's my older sister. She's seen me in the worst of my relationships. She's seen it all, so she knows I don't have any special insight into this. I'm blundering along like everyone else. But we talked about it a little bit, and I said, it's not relationship counseling. I'm not trying to fix problems, but this is really important what we do. When divorce rates were going higher and higher and higher. I can't remember where I read it, but I read somewhere that people who went through some kind of premarital counseling actually had less of a chance of that marriage ending in divorce. Didn't matter what kind of premarital counseling, but just anything gave you a better shot at doing this. And it's not because, like I said, you come to me and I fix all your problems and you've got this wonderful relationship, but because it makes sure that people are going into this with their eyes open. The biggest benefit of premarital counseling is that I make sure you're having certain conversations. I make sure that the two people are talking about certain issues before they get into this so that they don't pop up a year or 2 or 5 or 10 down the road and sabotage everything. And I make sure you hear things that you might not pay attention to otherwise. So it's not that I'm at all gifted in relationships, but I've been told what those conversations are and why they need to happen, and I make sure they do. One of the things that I asked couples, I didn't get to it, this was the first meeting, so we didn't get there this time with this couple this past Tuesday, but as I asked them, how do you fight? How do you argue with each other? What do you do when you're angry with each other? I think more than any of the other questions, this one always takes them aback the most because they're newly engaged and everything's wonderful and they don't want to admit to their priest that yes, they fight. But all of us who have ever been with another person for more than 2 hours knows something they do is going to anger you. And if you're going to last more than those 2 hours, you need to know how to work with that anger. I always bring up the saying that some of you are probably familiar with, don't go to sleep angry with one another. And I tell them, well, it's good advice, it's not a rule, and throw it out the window if they have to. Don't just cave on something that's important to you so that you can go to bed pretending you're not angry. Because when we don't know how to handle our anger, when we do things like sweep it under the rug, it doesn't magically go away, no matter how much we say, no, I'm fine, really. But it comes up somewhere else in some worse way than it would have if you just put it out in the open. This isn't any special new advice. We heard it in today's letter to the Ephesians. Be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Do not make room for the devil. Be angry. How many of us came in here this morning thinking being angry was, if not sinful, close to it? I imagine at least a couple. But here, quite clearly in Scripture, we're told to do that, but to do it well. We read elsewhere in the Gospels that Jesus himself got angry. Most notably, you might remember he went into the temple and saw people taking advantage of people coming to worship, and he flipped over some tables, and he made a whip and drove animals out of the temple. That wasn't nice, kind, meek, and mild Jesus. That was an angry Jesus. Before that, we hear him snap at Peter when he starts to tell his disciples that he's going to Jerusalem and they're going to arrest him and they're going to kill him. And Peter says, no, we can't let that happen. Jesus doesn't respond calmly and politely to Peter, saying, no, Peter, it's okay, it needs to happen. But he yells at him, get behind me, Satan. Those aren't kind words. Those aren't nice words between friends. He was angry with Peter at that moment. He gets angry at the Pharisees and scribes and Sadducees. But he's always getting angry not because he feels slighted, not because he's not getting his way, but he's getting angry for better reasons. As Christians, as people who seek to follow Jesus Christ in this world, we're not called to just be kind and meek and mild all the time, even though we know the meek will inherit the earth. But we're told at times it is important to be angry. But we need to do that well. We need to be angry without sinning. We need to not let the sun go down on our anger, which I don't think is the same as don't go to bed angry, but I think it means drag it out into the light. Let it be seen. Don't hide it. Don't sweep it away, but put it out there so it doesn't pop up somewhere else. We need to not make room for the devil in our anger. Because I bet all of us have instances where we did get angry and we gave into that anger about maybe something small and it flared into something much bigger. That's what the author's talking about here when he says, do not sin, do not make room for the devil in your anger. It's really easy to get swept up in that. To move, even if we had good cause, to move into sin. To make room for the devil in that anger. So as Christians, we are called, yes, to be angry at sometimes, but we've got to be really cautious about it. And it's not always easy to know what is and what isn't sinful, what is and what isn't making room for the devil in our anger. At our Friday morning Bible study, we were talking about it, and I asked one of our members, well, what is sin? And the response was cursing and not blessing. And we had been talking about a verse a little bit after this as well, the one about let no evil talk come out of your mouth. So we had been talking about words, and we went with using that idea just as words, cursing at someone instead of blessing them, which isn't always, most of the time, yes, sinful, yes, bad anger, but not always. If you've ever spent time in the South, you know people can actually use the word bless in talking to you and not actually mean anything nice. Oh, bless her heart. Depending on who says it, it's not a blessing. It's more of a curse. I have friends who can curse at you in a way that lets you know that you are loved and cared for by them. So it's not just the outward words, but it's what's behind those words that makes them curses or blessings, that makes it sinful or not. The biblical words for sin, well, there's a bunch of them because the biblical languages have a lot of words for things, we only have one. But the main ones, in Hebrew and Greek, both have this sense of missing the mark. I can't remember if it's Greek or Hebrew, but one of them is an actual archery term, where sin is not hitting the bullseye. Setting out to do something, to do it right and well, but not doing it. That's sin, missing the mark. And Jesus tells us in the Gospels what our mark is. He tells us that all of the law, all of the prophets are rolled up into 2 commandments. To love God with everything you have, with all of who you are, all your heart, strength, mind, and power. And to love your neighbor as yourself. He later adds on to that, because he knows sometimes we don't love ourselves that well, to love your neighbor as he loved you. So our mark, our bullseye, is loving God with everything we have, with all of who we are, and loving our neighbor, not just as we love ourselves, but as we have been loved by Jesus himself. When anything we do takes us away from those things, that's sin. So we can be angry and still be loving God and loving our neighbor. It's hard. It's really easy, like I said, to let that little thing explode into something else. In the letter of James, James writes that we have to watch our tongues because such a forest is set ablaze by a tiny fire, and the tongue is a tiny fire. The things we do, the words we say, though small, can have huge implications. So we got to be careful when we're angry. That other verse I mentioned about, let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only that which is good for building up, only that for which brings grace to the listener. Something, I lost the end there, but it's along the lines of that. It's in the middle of the Ephesians reading. You can check it out. As I was looking at it, I looked into how it was actually written, because as I said, Greek has many words for things, we only have one. And the word evil isn't actually one of the words we usually use for evil. It's a word that means rotten or overripe. So in terms of our language, the things we say, there's a sense that they have a ripe time and an overripe or a rotten time. How many of us have said something just a few minutes too late and it really upset someone? But if we had said it earlier or said it in a different context, it would have been good for building up. It would have been good for bringing grace to the listeners. Being a Christian isn't just about showing up, sitting in these pews and saying, yes, all this stuff sounds great. But as we've been hearing throughout the letter to the Ephesians, it's about a transformation of life. It's about becoming more Christ-like ourselves. This passage we heard ends, therefore love as Christ himself loved us. We have to go out and be imitators of Christ, lead Christ-like lives ourselves. That means sometimes we will be called to be angry, but we need to do it well. And it's not easy to do. It's really easy to give into that anger. It's really easy to explain away something that's just upsetting us and not really affecting whether we or someone else love God or love neighbor, and explode into that. There's no easy path for this. We have to love and care for one another. And sometimes that means getting angry. Sometimes that means standing up and speaking out when our neighbor is being unloved, when our neighbor is being harmed or hurt in any way. As Christians, as people striving to follow Jesus, we can't just sit back. The author of Ephesians tells us, go out and be angry. Do not sin, but be angry. Make sure you're saying those words in the right way at the right time. Make sure you're doing those things in ways that are building up your brothers and sisters, building up your neighbors. Make sure those words, those actions aren't causing you to miss the mark. But the things you're doing are intended to love God, are intended to love your neighbor as you have been loved, are intended to see that even if you are loving your neighbor, someone else might not be, and your neighbor is being protected as the beloved child of God that they are. It's a really difficult thing. It's simple to follow Jesus, right? Love God, love neighbor. Most of us, I think, have heard me say that enough. You don't need me to tell you anymore. You don't need to read it in the Gospels anymore. But it's not easy to actually do. It's not easy to do faithfully, to do well. We're all going to mess it up. We're all going to get angry, and we're going to sin. We're going to make room for the devil in that anger at times. But the goal is The mark is that we pick ourselves back up and try a little bit harder. We recognize where we gave in to that anger. And the next time something upsets us, we can see, no, this is all right. Or no, we need to get angry. We need to flip these tables over and drive these animals out. We need to stand up for our neighbor who's not being loved. We need to stand up for loving God with everything we have. I can't give you an easy formula on how to differentiate between them. But talking with one another, that helps. That's that power of premarital counseling. It's that you get them talking about these issues. They see more clearly these issues that can be divisive, and they don't become divisive later on. Our anger can build up or it can destroy. It can be a blessing or a curse. Left to ourselves, we're more likely to give in, to make that room, to sin. But coming here, being a part of this community, talking with one another, listening to one another, we can see where we're being drawn away and where, yes, we need to go in and flip those tables. Where, yes, we need to yell at Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." God has such big dreams for this creation. And despite our best efforts, we, as humankind, have really messed things up. But he's leaving it to us right now to clean up that mess. We're going to continue to mess things up some more. But that doesn't mean we can't start working cleaning it up a little bit. Sometimes we're going to have to swallow our tongue, bite our tongue, don't swallow it, bite our tongue. Sometimes we're going to have to let it go and light that fire that James warns us about. Whatever we're doing, though, we're doing to hit that mark. We're doing to more ably love God with everything we have, with all of who we are, and to love our neighbor not just as we love ourselves, but as Jesus, as God himself loves each and every one of us. Amen.